Welcome to Plus One Forward, the podcast powered by the Apocalypse, where we talk about tabletop role-playing games using or inspired by the Apocalypse engine. This episode continues our summer series about Forged in the Dark games. I'm your MC, Rach.
And I'm Rich. Tonight, we are joined by our guests from Off Guard Games, John LaBeouf Little and Strash Achivovich. Hey guys, how are you doing?
Great. It's glad to be here.
Doing good.
So Strash and John, I'll ask you each in turn. Strash, why don't you tell us about your first experience with Forged in the Dark games?
A little known fact is that actually before I was a game designer, I was a playtester. I spent a lot of time playtesting different games for a bunch of indie game designers. Another factoid is that John Harper has had a long-standing Wednesday night crew, which I'm sure has moved days and other things. But a member of that crew is Sage LaTorra, and since I had worked pretty closely with Sage LaTorra on some PBTA-based games before that, I got recommended as a playtester, and therefore I got added to one of the early Google+, if you remember that, beta groups for Blades in the Dark.
Very, very cool. John, the same question for you. Maybe I should have led with you, John. Do you feel cool about this?
Yeah, no, I'm good. I remember playing Blades in the Dark as like a playtest early on in a friend's living room with Strash and a couple of other friends, and just being really jazzed about the experience. There was some really cool stuff in it, and I remember the rules at the time were formative, and there were pages that were maybe even blank, just like TBD, but it was also really cool to watch it grow as it happened.
Blades actually went through a whole bunch of iterations. I think at some point, Sean and I sat down and counted, and I'd played something like over 30 versions of Blades.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's the first version was nothing at all like what we saw here. As a matter of fact, when Harper put out the first playtest, I TPK'd my group inside of 15 minutes. And it was fine. We just like paused the game and talked about the experience and what went wrong and how, things could shift. And I wrote that up in a big AP report. So yeah, it's been quite a bit of a journey.
Nice. Well, let's jump on over here and talk about setting position and effect.
Setting position and effect.
In setting position and effect, our guests will discuss some aspect of Forged in the Dark play or table culture that they want to put a spotlight on.
So, Strash, John, what about Forged in the Dark play do you want to talk about tonight?
I think probably the thing that's like burning a hole in my heart is actually setting position and effect and the table culture around it. I really love what comes out of the play of Forged in the Dark games, which is to talk about position and effect, to talk about what is the fiction at this moment and how dangerous is this, for instance. If I'm going to stab a guy, what are the outcomes that could potentially happen?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
You get into this pattern of play that happens when you develop that as part of your play culture, where you're just always talking about, well, how do you see it? How do you think that this might evolve? Like what's on the table here? What's not on the table? And it makes the game produce these really cool experiences long-term that I love. Really powerful stuff because you have all of this buy-in at every step of the way.
Mm-hmm.
John, would you say that facilitates sort of a shared storytelling culture at the table?
Yeah. There's a whole discussion about like devil's bargains.
Mm-hmm.
So devil's bargains are, I will accept that this thing is true in the fiction in exchange for the chance that I might succeed a little bit more likely on this roll. In the Blades mechanic, you roll a bunch of d6s and the best die wins. So more dice is better. So a devil's bargain gives you an extra die. But a devil's bargain might be something like, this person actually knows who you really are, or it might be your fiance is actually also at this party. These sorts of things that can add additional complications to the scene. But anyone's allowed to suggest a devil's bargain. Of course, the GM has the final say about whether something is okay, because there are some devil's bargains that are just too not good enough. Like they don't hold up to our standard for what we need.
Mm-hmm.
But that experience of like, someone's throwing out like, I can't think of a really good devil's bargain. Can any of you think of something? It becomes very collaborative at that point, which is really fun.
And does Scum and Villainy talk about good devil's bargains and less good devil's bargains?
Yeah, sure. There's all sorts of discussion around whenever you have those narrative tools that allow you to inject new fiction. There's always a discussion around, well, where is the line for what's good fiction and what's not? Another example is flashbacks, where you can spend a limited currency called stress. You spend stress in order to have done something in the past. So you say, oh, I pull out my blaster. Well, would you normally have had a blaster at this fancy dinner party? Maybe not. But flashback, I stashed one in my whatever that I was bringing to the party. Okay, then sure, that's going to be one stress. But now you have your blaster.
I never felt comfortable without a blaster at my hip. So my friend, who's a waiter, currently has one underneath that particular silver dinner tray or whatever. And depending on how likely or unlikely it is, you can spend some stress to make it happen.
Yeah.
It allows you to solve problems without necessarily spending hours preparing in advance to handle them.
Yeah. And it can be one of those, again, another touch point for table discussion and buying into the fiction, where I propose a flashback where I say, well, maybe I have a blaster. The GM says, but they have guards. They would have searched you. And then someone else could suggest, oh, but a waiter might be able to get it in. And I have a friend who's a waiter, so maybe they brought it. And so we build this story that everyone can say, yes, that makes sense to us.
How much time do you normally find where people are negotiating and talking about what might or might not happen versus like talking in funny voices and character and stuff?
Honestly, when people are really jazzed, they actually don't even spend a whole lot of time like doing the position effect stuff. So with the right group, once you've gotten used to it, there are a lot of assumptions you can make. You get a good feel for what's, this is probably going to be risky. I will accept whatever comes out of this. I'm just going to roll. And people will just pick up dice and roll. Mm-hmm. But then there's also times when it's like, I'm not 100% sure what might happen. And then you slow things down and ask, hey, what's the position here? How do I improve my position? Those sorts of questions are usually reserved for higher stakes circumstances.
Okay.
Where maybe death is on the table, in which case I definitely want to know that. Is this desperate? Is this a desperate position where I might get skewered through by a plasma sword? Who knows?
One of the things that the core book actually suggests is that by default, all action should be risky because you shouldn't be rolling unless there's an element of risk. Mm-hmm. And so most of the time, what happens is people will have this sort of discussion when you're moving either away from the norms or when there is significant question about what needs to be put together. When you first start playing and you've never done a roll, there's probably going to be a lot of discussions. But if you've made like 50 rolls or 100 rolls or 1,000 rolls, as the case may be, the groups become much, much quicker to accept some of the default settings and will only, you'll hear a GM interject, where a player's like, oh yeah, I want to do this. And the GM will be like, well, hang on, that's desperate. And the player's like, oh, great, free XP, let's go. You'll usually highlight the differentiation from, the baseline. I've actually heard some groups say that it takes them a significant amount of time. There's a lot of slowdown, but I would say that in general, once the group gets accustomed, there's some defaults that become sort of the standard. And I hear a rumor we may get to play some games later, so we'll see how that goes.
We'll see. Strash, did you have anything you wanted to talk about in setting position and effect?
Yeah. If we're going to be talking about favorite mechanics in Blades, there is a core mechanic that I think I haven't really seen in any other game system at all, which is the resistance roll. And I think that the resistance roll is a really interesting mechanic. Basically, it's a way of saying no to the GM.
Could you describe how the resistance roll works?
I'd be delighted to. So, in general, what happens is the GM will describe the worst possible outcome as dictated by dice on a roll. So, if, for example, I say, hey, I'm going to fight this person, the GM will say, oh, but they're really skilled. So, you try to fight them and it's a desperate roll, then the GM might say, well, you land your blow, but they also, slip a knife between your ribs. That might be a terrible condition. You're like, oh, well, I'm probably going to die, right? But then you can say, no, that doesn't happen. And you're not allowed to change what the dice said, so you can't, add successes or completely negate failures. But what you can do is reduce consequences. So instead of saying, yes, a knife slips through my rib cage and, I bleed out and die, what you can say is, the knife hits my side, and as it's about to pass through my ribs, it instead glances off of the plastiweave armor I have, I guess if you're in Scum and Villainy, or some chainmail or something, and it glances off and we see sparks, And instead of bleeding out and dying, I'm okay. And so like that's the thing that you can do is like you can actually say no to certain outcomes, which is really, really unusual, right? Like we're used to games where the GM's word is kind of canonical. It's like the last thing that gets said and it has the force of law. And so like in this game, it's still a negotiation. If you have the stress to spend, you can do that. And there are really some really interesting discussions where the GM says something absolutely terrible and the player says, yes, that happens. That's how it goes. And then there are moments when, you know, you're like, and this person knows that you're lying and you can see the betrayal in their eyes and you're like, no, I'm going to resist that. I don't care if there's terrible consequences for me. I can't let that happen. I will roll anything you tell me to roll. So yeah, there's like a lot of flex even after the moment of rolling where the outcomes have some negotiation and players still have the ability to say no. But what's interesting for me as a GM is that I can be very, very honest about what the outcomes are going to be, right? Like if the players are going to get really badly mauled, or they're going to be terribly betrayed, or the systems on their ship are going to fail, or whatever the case may be, I can actually say that frankly, and we can see what is the worst thing that could have happened, and then we can see how somebody saves the day, how they push themselves past human limits, how they grab something at the last second, and we can see that horrible outcome rewinding just like a half second back and seeing exactly how they glance off the side of that horrible thing. And so you feel confident as a GM. You can actually just say stuff and you know that the players have a lot of agency and they have a lot of ability to help negotiate that and sort of like put the kibosh on things that are going to go too far. So you don't have to worry all the time so much about like playing hard. You can play as hard as you need to and the players have ways of saying no.
Yeah, sometimes you really want the bad thing to happen to your character because it's dramatically appropriate, and sometimes it's dramatically appropriate to shake your fist at God.
Yeah.
That's pretty much exactly it.
I remember a scene where a character at some point had something akin to they took a bunch of damage and then someone else felt really disappointed in how they reacted. And they only had just enough stress to like make one resistance roll. And they resisted the person thinking badly of them rather than the injury. Because they didn't actually care if that their character was going to take this wound. They cared what this other NPC standing actually thought. Right, like Space Dad, basically, is going to disapprove. That can't happen.
That's so good.
Nice. That is really cool. Do you find that after GMing Blades in the Dark with a group, that there's like this expectation that you should, as a GM, be harder because there's that resistance fallback, and if you're not going to the worst possible conclusion, they don't resist?
I've gotten in trouble in other games because my thresholds have been set at Blades levels of consequences with the expectation that you push hard and then they resist, because if you don't make them interesting enough, players will just let that stuff happen.
Mm-hmm.
So in other games where you don't have a resistance mechanic, sometimes if you're sort of velocitized to making the outcomes really bad, then you might have like accidentally chopped an arm off.
I don't have any like dog in a race specifically here, but I think that a lot of takes that we've seen in sort of PBTA style games revolve around just playing in the sandbox that is a genre. And I think that my answer to that is that it depends on the setting. I know that a lot of times in Scum and Villainy, it really depends on what kind of episode are we having, right? Like if you've taken a job against a lower tier faction, it's probably going to be more slapsticky. There's probably going to be a lot more drama between the characters, and the outcomes don't need to be pushed quite as hard.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that if you're taking action against really powerful factions and facing up against some truly epic opponents, that can be very, very nasty. We've written other Blades style games like Band of Blades, which is, dark military fantasy,
mm-hmm.
and the genre of horror, of course, pushes a lot harder against people. So I definitely push a lot harder when I'm jamming in those, but I think that the answer to that is, yeah, I generally do go a little bit harder than I would in other games. Many other games talk about, like, balance, and they have like a lot of mechanical constraints about how you construct oppositions and stuff like that. And I think that here, definitely it's mostly narrative, which doesn't make it bad. Like wounds are definitely mechanical, but narrative outcomes can be equally bad. Like a faction going to war with you is potentially worse than taking a cut to a hand or a slight to your ego.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that it really depends. I think it's about reading the table. I think it's about being genuine and true to the fiction. And I think it's about just like figuring out where your game lies, which I will say that I do tend to run it a little bit harder because the players have so much agency. It tends to feel a little bit less difficult, a little bit less exciting maybe. I don't know if you maybe don't push as hard, but I think that there's definitely a lot of leeway, and finding that sweet spot is part of what Blades is about, because as you start playing, there can be questions about what is risky, what is controlled, what is desperate. And I think that as you play more and more and you establish this world, one of the goals is to try and have everybody at the table understand what sort of action is going to be a risky action, so that players can sort of figure out ahead of time how dangerous something that they're trying to do and kind of make an informed decision, which I think is very satisfying to most players of games.
Cool. Why don't we jump on over here and check the progress clock?
Progress clock.
In the progress clock, what we do is we talk about a specific Forged in the Dark game. And we are, of course, if you check the title on the episode, talking about Scum and Villainy. So Scum and Villainy, what's it about? What's the setting?
The elevator pitch is Scum and Villainy is a Forged in the Dark game about spaceship crew trying to make ends meet under the iron-fisted rule of the galactic hegemony. So it's about working with members of your crew to thrive despite powerful criminal syndicates, warring noble families, dangerous aliens, and strange mystics, exploring ruins of lost civilizations for fun and profit. And it's about having a motley crew trying to sort of survive and make ends meet in a sector we call the Procyon sector, which is a 4-system gate interconnected network in the back end of the galaxy where nobody cares about it too much. It's not one of the shining cities of the core with gigantic warships patrolling every lane, but it definitely has some shadows and shades of gray and a lot of factions doing things that would be generally considered somewhat illegal, which makes it a wonderful place for scoundrels to thrive.
It's a way better pitch than the one sentence description that I was going to give, which is, It's Pew Pew Space Adventures.
I was going to say it's definitely the grittier aspects of various popular franchises, a space opera that we can't mention by name.
There's definitely some of that in there.
It's really funny because, like, a lot of people see a lot of different stuff in this, and we definitely sort of pay homage to a bunch of different things, and we leave a lot of ends open for people to sort of tune the taste of this to a bunch of different specific space operas that they might enjoy. But I think that, in particular, when I was originally writing it, the two biggest influences for me were Cowboy Bebop and it's this really obscure old anime called Outlaw Star.
Yeah.
I've heard of it.
Wee Strash was a big fan.
One of our mechanical ways of allowing you to play the kind of story that you're looking for is by selecting the appropriate ship. Because the ship often influences the kinds of powers that you get as a crew, and it kind of influences the missions that you go on. So if you want to play bounty hunters, if you want to play smugglers, there's plenty of shows that will fit into your crew type.
What mechanics are different in Scum and Villainy versus Blades in the Dark?
So ships is one. We replaced crews from Blades in the Dark with ships. They have had quite a bit of overhaul. In Blades in the Dark, you have turf that crews take over, and that's very appropriate for that game. Not super appropriate for a bunch of people that are flying through space. But the ship itself is very important, and what kinds of things you might put on the ship. Do you have a weapon, or does this ship not have any guns? Do you have a cloaking device? That could be very interesting. All sorts of stuff like that. Not to mention the actual powers that you get from the ship and the additional things you can get out of your crew.
I think that if you look at a lot of space opera, Blades is based on a number of things like Peaky Blinders and whatnot, where the control of a gang and sometimes even the control of a very large group of people is very common in the genre. But even when you're looking at large-scale space opera, things that involve battles for the destiny of the universe or whatnot, it tends to be a spunky crew of 2 to 8 individuals and their aptly named ship that is usually also the name of the show. This is like a standard in space opera, and so I think that there's definitely a big tonal shift. There's a lot of people that say that Scum and Villainy hews very closely to Blades, but I think that it's actually significantly different. It's just we hid a lot of the changes very carefully. So one of the things that Blades does is that it incentivizes controlled and desperate positions, right? It says that risky is the default, but you get XP for desperate actions, and in controlled positions, you can approach and disengage without any trouble. It reduces the damage. It tends to be something that you're going to mechanically want to be in if you can't get the bonus XPs. One of the things that I spent a lot of time doing when we first started this, I watched a lot of space opera in order to write down what they were doing on screen. So if they're running, I wrote it down, and then that became an action and things like that. But the other thing that I did was I was looking at the level of desperation, and one of the things that I realized is that the majority of the actions are risky. To quote a Rogue One, actually, it's you take a chance, and then you take another until you're all out of chances. It actually places a lot of options sort of like in that risky rubric. So one of the things that we did was we incentivized risky rolls by providing these bonus dice called Gambits that are crew-wide. So people taking risky rolls will be able to generate a currency, which is then used by other people. So we decreased the Blade's 4-core die pool for actions down to 3, and we added this Gambit mechanic, so a lot more people are willing to and even engaged with that risky mechanic, so that the game tends to be a lot less desperate and gritty. It tends to be a little bit more high adventure. People tend to take much more reasonable risks. And there's a lot of interplay with that actually changes the tone of the game significantly. You'll find that most Blades games tend to have scoundrels, period, whereas a lot of Scum and Villainy games that I've read about and talked to people about tend to have scoundrels with hearts of gold. It's a lot easier to be a good guy in Scum and Villainy than it is in Blades. Blades, the city is a horrible, corrupt place, and even if you try to do the right thing, it'll grind you down until under its boot heel until you do the thing that is necessary. And Scum and Villainy is a lot less on that particular gas pedal because that's the genre that we were trying to emulate. It's not a judgment, it's just the particular milieu that we were working in. So very small change, very big difference in play, we find. So
yeah, I definitely can see how that change would lead to making more space for, again, that space opera genre rather than gritty gang warfare.
Yep.
So what is your favorite move or mechanic, and why? Strash, we'll let you go first.
all right, I'm gonna have to be mean here and actually pick 2. This is not a move. This is just I'm gonna go with, I will do a move right after this, but let's start with the mechanic. I think my favorite mechanic is, we were messing around with a lot of the core Blade styles in order to show how you can bend some of the existing Blades rules to do some funny things. And so there was this moment when I made the muscle and I didn't write down like a list of hard-boiled friends. So I think in the initial pass of the game, every single one of their friends was a named weapon. So like, Sasha the flamethrower or whatnot. Like we just had a bunch of like named guns. And I think that got cut down because named characters are a lot easier to introduce plot with and do a bunch of stuff like that. But they still can have a gun as a best friend. And if it's their worst enemy, it happens to be carried by somebody else and it holds that one singular bullet for them. I think that that's just really neat, is that instead of having a person for a friend, like, your gun is your best friend. Because we definitely see that, right? Like, a lot of scoundrels in shows have, like, Winona is the handgun in Farscape.
Yes.
Right? So this is definitely a thing that's a trope. And I think if I have to actually select a move, my favorite move, it's actually the Xena move. So very common trope in sci-fi. We actually had a big talk about this. Like, do we make it like something like Cowboy Bebop where everyone's just human? Or do we make it colorful and bright? We decided that we wanted to have aliens of every shape and color, but instead of having a book of where we devote like 100 pages to doing very casual, high-level 3-sentence descriptions of an entire planet's history and species in order to generate 3 dies, we just kind of have this very flexible move, the Xena move, which it swaps out for the starting move for every career that we have, every playbook that we have. Mm-hmm. And what it does is it allows you to sort of define what your version of a heavy G squid-like alien first mate might have as their particular alien traits. Like, what makes them different? What makes them special? Are they able to survive in the vacuum of space? Can they use sonar to see things in the dark or through walls? Like, how much stress does that cost? And there's this like little ritual sort of that you can follow to try and like make a selection of costs, and it's basically like a prearranged series of things that you are going to be able to do. And it's actually created some really delightful stuff, because I've seen a lot of people that have invented all sorts of alien species, and they've written up these xenoboobs and done a whole bunch of art. And so consequently, I've seen a lot of characters that have all of these wonderful additional traits. It secretly empowers people creating characters to be a little bit of game designers themselves. So
Nice.
John, what's your favorite move or mechanic?
I've got 2 as well. Ha! So, yeah, not to be
4.
outdone.
Oh gosh.
I would say in terms of moves, there's a character called the Speaker that's really very interpersonal. And they have this power called Old Friends, which gives them an NPC that they get to dictate that they know every time they land in a new port. And I've had people use that power to just amazing effect where they'll land and they'll happen to know exactly the right person. And it's lovely because it generates all this cool plot, because then you get to ask them, well, how did you know? Well, how did you leave things off with them? Was it a good relationship? Was it bad? And it leads to such rich experiences. The other thing I really love is on one of the crews, the Fire Drake, which is very much we're fighting a rebellion against the Empire. There's a upgrade you can get for the ship called the Popular Support. And it doesn't do anything super mechanical. It just means that wherever you go, you have supporters who believe in your cause. And it's incredibly attractive to people who play the ship. They look for it and they want it and they save up for it and they make sure they get it eventually, because every rebellion is trying to win over the people.
Hearts and minds, right?
Yeah.
Nice. That is very fun. The idea of I've got to save up to be able to have some popular support. That's nice.
It's one of the harder upgrades to get. I think you need like 3 upgrades to get it. But when you do,
it means that you can't start with it, but it means that when you get it and the first time you see some poor individual waving you in who gives you their back room to hide in as the space police is looking for you because you started some trouble in that particular neighborhood, it's incredibly gratifying.
Yeah.
I was going to say that's a good plot moment in a game.
Right.
People care about us.
Right. When they throw you in the brig and there's already your rebellion's logo painted on the wall, like, that's a cool moment.
I guess I don't have to ask Rich if he is excited to play some Scum and Villainy. I think everyone listening knows the answer. But I'm definitely feeling hyped to go play some Scum and Villainy. So that brings us to our next segment, The Score.
It's time for The Score.
In The Score, our guests will host this small segment of play featuring their game, in this case, Scum and Villainy. Strauss, would you like to lead us in?
John and I talked about it, and I guess I'm the GM for this particular session. I'm going to paint a little bit of a picture. We're going to jump right into the action, and part of the reason we're doing this is because, only got so much time. Let's just dive right into it. The ship that I chose for you folks, because I did a couple of pre-gens in order to just get right into it, was the Cerberus. The Cerberus is a bounty hunting ship, so you folks are bounty hunters, and you're currently in the Rin system of the Procyon sector. Your ship has been hunting Ovianus Rex, a particularly nasty assassin who has a bounty on their head. You caught up to them once on the main planet of the system, and they got away from you, and they were hiding on a refining station flying inside a gas giant. Now, we've already captured this person. They're in your brig. You're heading for a payday. You're thinking that this is great. You're out of money, and your ship is going to need some repairs because you had to go into like a gas giant, which is a heavy G planet, and you're just going to have to get everything scrubbed, some things repaired, and so on. And just as you're exiting, there is a moment where a shot gets fired into the clouds, and you can see them because you've got long-range scanners, but they don't know exactly where you are. But you get a transmission that's vaguely fired off in your direction, and there's this group called the Ashen Knives, and they have a ship in orbit. And there is a captain of the Ashen Knives who lets you know that, in particular, this assassin has killed one of their members. And while they appreciate the fact that you captured them, they will be taking this person now. And won't you just hand them over and get ready to be boarded, please? So that's the situation that we're going to start in. You're not immediately under fire, but they definitely have an idea of where you are. They know you have this person. Go ahead and just give us like a 1-second introduction to your character and your look, and tell me what you want to do.
I am playing our signature character Plussy as a mystic. He is wearing a long coat, loose silk pants, and soft shoes.
I'm playing Espa, who is the scoundrel, because Rach gonna Rach. She's short, has shaggy brown hair, and wears layered clothing in dark colors, and has goggles.
Excellent. And I will play the relatively quiet pilot named Ray, wearing a pullover with some cool aviators, maybe with one artificial eye, blinking into the darkness of space.
I've seen the future, and it is very dark if we hand over Avianus Rex to these knives. I think we need to get out of here.
Future schmoocher. We don't get paid unless we get the guy.
It's true. Is there a better future for our bank account if we get out of here?
Signs point to yes.
Excellent. So I guess we go full burn, Strash.
All right.
Try and run away.
Ray, our pilot. What is the plan here? Now, I have to point something out. The Ashen knives are a higher tier than you, and so their ship tends to have better stuff than you. So what's the plan? How are you planning to shake them and get away from them when you know that their engines can go for a heavier burn?
Is there a moon nearby? Can we circle around a moon?
Yes, as a matter of fact, there is both a moon and a space station. What's the plan?
I think we fly through the space station airspace and let the autoguns decide that the bigger target is the people behind us.
So as a point of note, I intentionally built your ship without guns.
Sure.
So you definitely are not going to be a major target, right? Like you're
Right.
not going to have, you're not going to be flagging as somebody who's running hot, as it were.
Sure.
All right, awesome. You're going to try like erupt out of the atmosphere and just like go full burn and hope to dodge whatever matter cannon fire they throw at you so that your ship doesn't get cut in half. That's the plan?
That's the plan.
Well, this feels like a risky situation. John, would you like to make a roll?
Excellent. This is a helm action, I think.
Yes. So here's some things that I'll tell you. It's a risky situation with limited effect. This is why. It's risky because they're going to be shooting at you. Obviously, they're going to try and catch up. And the reason it's limited effect is because you can't make it all the way to the station in one roll normally.
Sure. I think I'm good with that. Just roll some dice. I have 2 in helm, so I'll roll 2 dice.
I will point out that I'm holding some tokens here in my hand that are going to represent the 2 gambits that you have as a crew. Anyone in your crew can use a gambit. I can give you +1d, and yeah, that's the thing.
I will leave the gambits for someone else and simply see how it goes. No, I got a 1 to 3. It goes poorly.
All right. All right. So I'm going to tell you some terrible things, and then I will ask you about whether you would like to resist any of them.
Sure.
So here's the good news. There's no good news, actually. You rolled a 1 to 3. This sucks for you. Now you're in a desperate position.
Yep.
3 things happen. 1, as you go full burn and you erupt out of this, your ship can go into atmosphere, but it's not designed to go necessarily at this level of speed with this kind of drive through the atmosphere of a gas giant. And so as you come out, red lights flash, and the little camera that you have pointed into your engine room showcases that there is a giant fire, as something in the engine just like there's a shake and an explosion somewhere in the back end of your ship, and now there's fire in the engine core. That's one bad thing. 2 bad things. They fire a couple of matter cannon rounds, and you dodge left, you dodge right. Your ship doesn't actually get hit, but what they do is something that you didn't expect, which is that they launch a small craft that is going to catch up to your ship. It looks like they're sending boarders over to bring back your prisoner. And last but not least, it looks like they're going to be able to intercept you before you reach the base. So now I ask you, do you wish to resist any or all of these?
I am going to resist the engine blowing up, because I think that I keep the ship in too good of repair.
The engine's not, like, gone. You may
Sure.
send somebody back to, like, patch it or repair it or try and put the fire out, if you like.
No, I think it's just a matter of making sure that I make certain maneuvers and roll with the shots that are coming in, which is probably why, in fact, we didn't get that far, because I'm actually taking more evasive maneuvers than actually making progress.
Okay, so basically you have to, like, shut down some parts of the engine in order to cool it off and stymie the fire. That sounds
Right.
fine. Do you want to give me a resistance roll?
Yeah, absolutely. So resistance roll is going to be the number of skills that I have in a particular attribute. So I'm going to roll 2 dice to resist, and I got a 5, so I take 1 stress. And I'll mark that down, and that will not happen, Strash. My engine is okay.
All right, sounds good. So, John, do you have a plan to get away from this, or is this giant looming ship going to cut you off and you're just in trouble?
I think we are in trouble.
All right, cool. Scoundrel and Mystic, you're about
Prepare
to
to
get
be
boarded,
boarded.
and it looks like you folks are going to get cut off from being able to make your escape good. What's the plan here while the pilot is desperately trying to keep the ship together?
So hear me out.
I'm listening.
We let them try to board, but we rig the docking mechanism to send a surge and knock their boarding ship back. Maybe even fry out the extender that they want to use to grab hold of our ship.
When do you think that you'll do that?
I'm going to start running right now.
All right, so let's have a conversation about what we want this outcome to look like. I have a feeling that what they're going to do is they're going to extend some sort of grapple arm and latch on. And the thing is that if you just vent your bay at that point, it's going to shake them off, but they'll probably be able to come in for another pass. You probably want for them to, like, actually send out some people, but before they can drill a hole into your ship or whatever, maybe, like, you blow it off then, and then you can try and take care of the boarding crew either with some fancy flying or maybe some enterprising mystic can put on an EVA suit and meet them on the skin of your ship. That way, even if they re-grapple, they wouldn't be able to, like, reboard well, and they would be in a worse position on the outside. Does that sound fair?
That sounds fair.
All right, awesome. So what kind of action do you think is probably the kind of thing that is going to address this sort of problem? Are you looking for, like, rig, which is like a mechanical solution?
It does sound like rig in this case. That was the one I was looking at because it feels like we're going to fiddle with these mechanics.
Mm-hmm. That sounds great. We see the scoundrel dashing towards the cargo bay, opening up some panels, putting some wires together. Do you want to give me a rig roll? I feel like this is actually a controlled roll. And the reason it's controlled is because if something goes wrong, if you can't set up the problem or whatever, you can back away, or you can do it with a minor consequence.
Okay. I'm just going to roll 2d6 because I have a 2 in rig. So that is a 4 and a 5. Remind me how dice work in this game?
Specifically, your best die is the one that looks, unless you have multiple 6s. Multiple 6s is a crit, but your best die otherwise is your result.
So in a 4 to 5, you can either do it with a minor complication, or you can back away and try a different approach. So what happens is you realize that in order to actually disconnect this and blow out the bay, someone's going to have to actually be in the cargo bay. Now, you can have your mask on and everything else, but you're going to make the same roll and you're going to make it at risky because you're going to have to actually manually touch the wires together and actually get the whole thing to decompress at the right moment. Because ships aren't designed to arbitrarily open to space on command. That's generally bad policy. You try it and the ship is like, and you're like, okay, override. And it's like, and you're like, okay, I'm going to have to just manually cross the wires and force the gates to open.
Okay, so rolling with risk means?
It just means that we're going to move the position down. So you started by making a controlled roll. And what I'm saying is, listen, this is not going to be able to be done controlled. You're going to have to roll the same dice, but you're going to have to roll it risky. And the consequences are going to be greater. Because now some of the consequences might be like, and you get blown out into space. Previously, the consequences were, the plan doesn't work. That's the worst thing that could happen. But now we're actually getting into danger. But that is also the scoundrel's home. Now you can generate gambits.
That sounds like a great idea. So I'm going to definitely make this risky roll.
So before you do, I'm going to point out that you have a power called Never Tell Me the Odds. One of the things that you can do is you can spend a gambit. So traditionally, if you're spending a gambit, you can't generate a gambit on a roll. But a scoundrel is special. They can generate a gambit on a roll that they're spending a gambit on. So you can spend a gambit to get plus 1d and hope that you get a 6. Or you can just let the dice fall where they will and see what the outcome is.
I'm going to spend a gambit.
Okay.
This seems
Awesome.
risky in my wheelhouse. It seems like a terrible idea. Let's go.
Perfect. I'm going to spend this gambit now, so you're down to 1 gambit as a ship, and I'm going to ask you one more question. You start with 8 stress in your pool.
Okay.
If you fill up all of it, you can trauma. So would you like to spend 2 stress to push yourself for an additional die?
I didn't know about it and I already rolled, so.
Oh,
That's fine. All right, so what did you roll? Tell us.
So a 1, and a 6.
Perfect. So on a 6, you do it. The door opens. You see several of their, like, boarding crew coming out of the hatch and everything. And then there's this blast of air, and their, like, little, like, grappler arm wiggles, and then you actually hear some pop and a hydraulic let's go, and their ship goes flying back into the void of space, and you're still clutching sideways onto your panel as, like, the air is whooshing out of the bay, and you're fine. They're in an exposed position, and you're still indoors, and, you've got your hands on the edge of a panel. Rich, what is our mystic doing? What's the plan here?
Let's see. We have currently the fire in the engine core didn't happen.
No.
The boarders have been repelled, but they are nearing to intercept with us while Ray
That's
is
correct.
still trying to keep that from happening. We don't have any guns. I have a side blade, which is not very helpful right now. So what kind of options do I have to stop these guys from intercepting me and our ship?
You can study the situation to see if you can come up with any sort of plan that isn't immediately obvious. That's totally a thing you can do.
Sounds like that's what I'm doing.
Excellent!
1 die in study.
So now I'm going to ask you similar questions. We happen to have 2 gambits in the pool again because of that 6. Would you like to A, spend a gambit, or B, would you like to push yourself for an additional die? And then we will introduce assistance here in a second.
I will push myself for an additional die, so I'm rolling 2 dice to study the situation.
Cool. And then I will ask anybody else, does somebody want to assist? The way that you assist is you spend 1 of your stress, and you can give a +1d to somebody's action, but you have to narrate how you help them figure something out.
I'm more than happy to help. I will pull up a bunch of scanner output and show it up on the various screens.
Cool.
Plus, he can make some sort of decision here.
So Rich, you get a bonus die. You're up to 3 dice now.
Nice. It sounds like a thing that I have a chance. Here we go. And my best die is a 5.
All right, so on a 4 to 5, you do it with a consequence, or you can choose to back away and try a different way. But I think that study is probably fine. So I think what you're looking for is some information here.
Mm-hmm.
So you think that there is a chance that if the ship is intercepting you, their velocity is forward. In order for them to, they can cut you off from getting to the space station, and they can probably get some fire on you. Now, you can't stop them. You don't have a gun. You don't have anything to throw at them. But one of the things you notice, there are like 2 plans before you, but they're both kind of risky. Your ship has a grappler arm. The reason it has that is because you oftentimes have to board other ships. So you have to latch onto them and actually like cross over and go inside to capture your bounty, right? And there does happen to be this tiny boarding vessel that was trying to latch onto you. You might be able to grab onto them and maybe throw them at the bigger ship. It's not going to damage them in a way that's going to cause them to crash into the planet, but it might, like, send them off course and damage them enough that you'll be able to slip by them. So maybe that's an option.
Uh-huh.
Does that sound fun or interesting?
It sounds very fun, but you said there's a second option?
Yes, the second option is you can try for some extremely complex heavy burn maneuver where you, like, try to skim the surface of the atmosphere and use the friction of it to, you know.
Yeah, that sounds like a lot of math. I'll go
Yeah,
into
it
the
sure
grappling.
does. It's way, like, astrogation. Who knows about that?
Woof.
Yeah.
Not my specialty.
All right, sounds good. So did you want to try and grab this
Grappler
tiny
arm
ship and
toss. Awesome. Is that a scrap?
So the way the game works, All Blades works like this, is the player says, I think it's this action. And then we talk about it, right? Like, as a GM, I can say, like, well, that doesn't, like, maybe it's 0 effect, or maybe, like, you can't even do it, because, like, can I sway the arm into grabbing this? No, you can't talk to the mechanical arm. You got to control it. So traditionally, shipboard weapons are usually handled with helm. But this is not really a weapon. This is kind of an arm. So if you tell me that you want to try and, like, focus with the arm and pretend like it's an extension of your body and try and grab this thing, I can say, well, that's pretty awesome. And I definitely support your ability to do it. However, I think that it's kind of unlikely, so I'm going to give you less effect. So I'm going to say this is a risky roll with reduced effect. And you can tell me that you can push for effect instead of bonus dice, but it's totally like where I'm landing in my kind of initial gut check. How do you feel?
I can't think of any other way to use an action, so I'll go with that.
All right, sounds great.
I'll be going with scrap, and
Mhm.
I'd like to spend one of those gambits, because
All right, sounds good.
Pretty important.
Your
for us to
scoundrel
not
makes them
die.
and you use them up.
Yeah. Okay, so that's 3 dice that I'm rolling.
Wait, before we do that, just a quick question. John, did you want to assist in any way? I mean, you are in control of the ship.
Yeah, I'll assist. I can make small corrections with the ship to help you position.
So Rich, do you bring your pilot in on this plan? And
Of course, I'll say I believe that if we can just use that boarding ship as a projectile, we might be able to buy you some time to get us out of here.
It's a crazy plan, but it just might work.
I agree. John, do you spend a stress?
Yes, I do.
Rich, you get another die.
All right, here we go. And my best die is a 5.
Okay.
All right, awesome. So here's the good news. The good news is you're going to grab their ship. You're going to chuck it at the other ship. It's going to hit them in the engines. It's going to cause pretty much the effect that you were going for. Here's the bad news. Your grappler arm is designed to latch onto things. It's not designed to throw ships. So I think what happens is you're just going to blow a bunch of servos, and it's like there's going to be sparks. You're going to see like cables like blow out, and it's not going to be usable after this until you land and repair it somewhere.
Okay.
Well,
We could resist that, but also that sounds fine. That's a
Sounds like
PC
that would
problem.
happen in a show, right?
Yeah,
seems appropriate.
It's totally in genre. We're going to spend the bounty fixing the ship.
Right.
The damage we did to get the bounty.
So one last zoom out, I think what happens is you grab this thing, you fire the engines, you spin around and hammer throw it into this other ship. Our scoundrel, right? Like after all the air is done, you've got your helmet on, you're fine, the door starts closing. And this is when I remind you that there are enemies on the skin of your ship, right? Like you actually are like closing the bay doors again when you see the first laser axe catch on there. What do you plan to do here?
I think I'm going to go on our intership comms and say to punch it right now.
Okay, that sounds good. All right, so John, do you want to give me one more piloting roll to try and shake these fools off of the surface of your ship and blow past the enemy and into the range of the giant space station guns?
I'm going to get an extra die with a push. So that'll give me 3 dice.
I'd like to help.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely.
How would you like to assist?
I think that we have to redirect some of the power. You're focused on driving the ship. I'm just going to make sure that we drop some of the environmentals so that you have enough boost. There we go.
Nice.
All right.
Can more than one person assist, or is it capped?
No, only one person can assist at a time. So, like, even though multiple people can be in a particular action, only one die applies to the assistant. So there's no point in spending extra stress.
Fair.
Sorry.
Do we have any gambits left?
Yes, there is one gambit left on the table.
I will spend it.
All right.
So I have a whopping 5 dice.
Traditionally, your ship would only have one gambit, but since you have a scoundrel, their core ability is adding an extra gambit to the crew.
Yeah, things just work out better when you have a scoundrel.
They get luckier.
I got a 6.
Yes.
All right, perfect. That's the end of our little scene. I think we see your engines flare, your limp grappler arm sort of like shaking as you go blowing by the bigger ship, and we see you enter the protective bubble of the space station of the Guild of Engineers floating above this gas giant. If this were a TV show, of course, the comms would say, "Registered vessel Cerberus, your flight path was not designated. Please prepare to heave to, and we'll have some questions for you from station security." Dun dun dun!
Nice. That was great. What a fun little AP there. Thank you, Strash
Yeah.
and John. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us today. If our listeners want to follow more of your work online, where can they find you to?
I am at WorldNamer on Twitter.
I am at Strashe on Twitter, and also we actually have like an official website, offguardgames.com. That's the thing that I should say more often, which apparently I forget to do, where we blog sporadically, but it has links to all of our
Intermittently.
games. Yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you both so much for coming on Plus One Forward and sharing with us about Scum and Villainy.
Thank you for having us.
It was a pleasure.
Plus One Forward is a production of the Gauntlet community, Richard Rogers and Rach Shelkey. You can find us at gauntlet-rpg.com or follow us on Twitter at +1FWD. If you would like to support our show, visit our Patreon site at patreon.com/gauntlet. The games mentioned on this show use the Apocalypse engine, which is a creation of Vincent and Magay Baker. The music for Plus One Forward is from the Savage Aural Hotbed CD Gomi Daiko. The songs used are Gomi Daiko, Metal Version, and Drowning Attitude. You can find more amazing tunes by Savage Aural Hotbed on their website, www.savageauralhotbed.com.
Can you hear the footsteps in the shadows? Can you smell the metal tang of blood on the air? Can you feel the veil between worlds slipping away with each heartbeat? The between is here. The Between is a tabletop role-playing game about a group of mysterious monster hunters in Victorian-era London. These hunters learn about monsters and killers throughout the city and conduct investigations in order to neutralize them. Over time, they become aware of the plans of a criminal mastermind who is pulling the strings behind the scenes. They will eventually be forced to confront this mastermind in order to save Queen and Country. The Between is directly inspired by the TV show Penny Dreadful, but also takes inspiration from British horror classics, the works of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, pulp-era media, The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, and from Hell. It's powered by the Apocalypse and uses the mystery system from our hit game Brindlewood Bay. The Between comes with a 129-page rulebook, 7 playbooks, 10 scenarios or threats, a mastermind campaign sheet, reference sheets, and a supplement called London at Night, The Unseen. The Between PDF is available now on the Gauntlet Patreon. Just go to patreon.com/Gauntlet. The Between will be available on DriveThru RPG starting June 14th.